Hello and welcome to the Maddie James Show. I am doing a documentary on the MAID law. It is the best law to assist a person to help them die near the end of their life. And I'm excited about this because I'm a registered nurse. I've been a nurse for 30 years. And the reason I'm excited about it is it's the best law in the United States. New Mexico is the 11th state that has allowed this law to happen with the help of the governor and a huge amount of support from the community. And the beauty of the MAID law is that you must be of sound mind and you must be able to administer the medicine yourself. And I think that is what's really cool, where you're in complete control of the whole dying mess. And the purpose of this documentary and my reason for doing this is that this is a very personal decision. If you choose to end your life, it's really your choice. If you know you're going to die within days from a terminal illness.
For so long now, I pointed the finger. For so long now, it's my own, now it's my own. It's only by grace alone that I walk in the light.
So I'm a chaplain. I provide spiritual and emotional support as part of the team, and really just here to help patients and families kind of zero in on what's important to them and the ways we can incorporate that into their care. And I think in relationship to the MAID law, my role isn't really that different compared with any other sort of decision-making process that I might support patients and families in. Really about sort of giving people space to share what's important to them and share their values and reflect on what feels true to them and true to their, sort of their life situation, what they're experiencing. And so just like with any other healthcare decision, really creating a space that's non-judgmental for people to explore like their own spirituality and their own ethics at end of life. And I know I had mentioned to you before, sometimes what those conversations can look like is people sharing sort of like how their own religious background has sort of shaped their perspective on end of life. So people might raise questions about, sometimes people might ask me, like, what do I as a chaplain think? And really what's important is what people, like what the patient thinks, right? And what the family thinks, and kind of accompanying them through that process of discerning what is in line with their own values. I don't know if that kind of makes sense. So
Tell us a little bit about your role as a chaplain.
Yeah, so I typically, I can both be requested and then also kind of, if I get a referral for members of the team. But I'm really just there to be a space of support as people navigate sort of like different healthcare experiences. So I know that we've worked together on some cases. So sometimes if someone's in a lot of like emotional or spiritual distress, I'm really there to just kind of join with them in that experience. And I think when I started out as a chaplain, and I think sometimes people also get this idea that chaplains are there to fix. So they'll be like, oh, this patient is really upset. Like, can you go see them and make them feel better? And it's really not making people feel better. Although sometimes they may feel some relief, but it's really like joining them wherever they are, if they're sad or grieving or angry, and trying to identify like what is their spiritual need in that moment. So sometimes it's just having a space to share. Sometimes it's being left alone, honestly. Like I had someone once request, like, I just need 10 minutes to myself, like uninterrupted per day, to like process what I'm going through. So then, we could collaborate with the nurse to make sure that that actually could happen. And then sometimes it's wanting a priest to come and provide a blessing, or having family come. So it really just kind of depends on the person. Like every interaction is different based on what people are needing in that moment. Yeah, sometimes I make therapy dog referrals. Like sometimes, it's really like just completely whatever that person is needing. So it's very much directed by that unique situation. And then since I'm also part of the clinical team, like I was mentioning, like also making sure I'm collaborating so that the patient's values and their spirituality are included in their care. So that's another reason why I'm here too. So like in situations where people might have ethical questions or concerns about end of life, being able to really like offer space for people, like if someone says, I'm really scared of dying, then, validating that experience, and then also like, what is it that you're scared of, right? Or what is your perspective on what happens when we die? And for some people that is very much like informed by religion and spirituality. So really just allowing space for people to share kind of their experience and their concerns, and to just really be like heard in that moment, because I don't know how often we like have those conversations, or feel free to really honestly say like, I don't know what happens when we die and I'm scared, or maybe people feel really at peace and that's like not what anyone is expecting, and being able to like really acknowledge that reality. Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting thing, because I was talking about this recently with my partner. Like, I think often something people will say at the end of life is like, oh, they're in a better place, or like, oh, they're like, I don't know, just this sense of like there being this one very particular perspective that we should all join in. And I think really there are a lot of different perspectives on what happens when we die. Like I practiced in Buddhist tradition for quite a few years, where like death is actually not necessarily understood to be the end. And some people feel that, like some Buddhist schools feel that like, there is rebirth, and that our consciousness continues on in a different form. And in that way of thinking, like death isn't necessarily always like a relief from suffering. And there is more to that, but I think, everyone is just so unique in how we make sense of death. And I don't know if I can describe like sort of generally, because I think everyone is just so unique in how we make sense of that, and then how we continue to honor that connection with a loved one even after they've passed. And I think something that I try to do as part of my work is really to promote that connection between families and loved ones and patients who are at the end of life, and really invite sharing about who that person is, because that's something that we know people will carry on. And so giving an opportunity for people like at the time of death or before to begin that process of saying like, this is who this person is to me. Like they're a family member, they're a teacher, they're an artist, they're a musician. We always cooked this food together, or we always read this book, or and just beginning to kind of put language to that experience that maybe people never had to before, or never had the opportunity to before. Because in some ways, like you're saying, like death is one part of this process of grieving that's going to go on and look different for different people. Yeah, I mean, I think, and I don't have experience with that particular scenario in the hospital, just because that isn't something that happens here right now. But I think I have a lot of experience trying to create like spaces of reflection and connection at the end of life. And it is so unpredictable, right? Like there is this dimension of like, I don't know, there's just a lot of complexity to it, right? Because everyone's coming from a different place and maybe knows different things about the person's condition. And, but it sounds like in the scenario you're describing, right, like someone is really taking charge of kind of what their own experience is going to be and how they want their loved ones involved. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting and definitely something that I think allows an opportunity for like connection or ritual or whatever that person would like their goodbyes to look like. Yeah, and I mean, I think that's such a good point. It's like, you know, at working with families in the hospital, like often people may not want to be with their loved one as they're dying. You know, they're like, I would rather remember them the way they were when they were alive. And then for some people, it's really important that they be there in those moments when the person is actively passing. And I think everyone's just so different, right? And I imagine for the person too, right? Like, often it's hard to know like what people's preferences are when they're that sick. And I think, I don't know, I view my role as very much being about like supporting people in whatever way is right for them. Like if they want to be there, if they don't want to be there. And I think you gestured to this, but like also knowing that as caregivers, like we are reminded of our own loved ones, like in the work that we do, like inevitably. And it makes sense too that with things like MAID, we would have like a strong emotional reaction when we're caring for people who are making end-of-life decisions. And so I just also wanted to name that too, because I think there's an opportunity, like you're saying, for our own healing and our own care too, as we support others.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah, because I think otherwise it's too hard to be available to others when, I don't know, it's like pushing on our own. So basically, so there isn't any sort of medical aid in dying option in New York, at least not at the time that I trained there. And so I did do training in like palliative care and end of life in a hospital setting. Like, what does it mean to be a chaplain? Like, how do we support families in their decision making around end of life? And at one point I sort of had the question of like, you know, this option isn't on the table, but if it was, like, how would that change the care that we were providing, right? Like, how would it change what the doctor's role was, or how chaplain and social work kind of interacted with different end-of-life options? And I was very much told, like, that is completely separate from what we do, right? And I think that that was a real learning for me, like, oh, this is something that, you know, was presented as being in a very much a whole other universe from the kind of care that I was already providing. So when I moved to New Mexico, and I actually didn't realize at the time I moved here that MAID was an option. And so then talking to my colleagues in the hospital and then being like, no, actually, like, this is very much part of the landscape here, and like it will come up. And so being able to say, you know what, actually the skills that I learned working in palliative care in another place really do actually apply quite well, right? Like the same skills of being like non-judgmental and offering people space to explore and really validating their experience in whatever way they feel about end of life. I think those, for me, it feels like there's really not a substantial difference between like creating space for people to explore sort of what their faith might teach them about MAID, how they're feeling about MAID, and whatever other end-of-life kinds of decisions they might be making, like if they wanted to go on hospice or where they want to be or who they want to have with them, you know, if that makes sense. Not to like lump things together too much, but really letting the patient kind of lead the way. I'm just thinking too about how like there's always a power dynamic, right? Like when I go to the doctor's office and I'm like receiving care, there's a power dynamic there. Like, do I really feel like I can share what I'm thinking about or what I'm feeling about? And I think if you have a good doctor, it like eases the way. And I think similarly, like wanting to make sure that we're creating a space where people feel like they can be honest about what their needs and their values have to say about end of life, and if there are important things about them and their spirituality or their background that are informing that experience, that we can like surface those and include them in their care so that people aren't, I don't know, people do feel like they can be honest about what they're needing and wanting. And so we can kind of make sure they're aware of their options, I think is really, really important.
Death is not easy. I really am interested in this because 20 years ago I got my master's as a nurse educator and a clinical nurse specialist. And I have since allowed the nurse specialist to expire, but I still use my master's on a daily basis. I am a staff nurse at a local hospital in New Mexico, and I have seen good deaths and bad deaths. And what I really like about the MAID law is that when I graduated 20 years ago, I did research on it on how this could happen in Wisconsin. See, it was 2004, and I did my thesis on the Oregon end-of-life law, and also the state of Washington had it at that time in 2004. So since then, in the last 20 years, 9 more states have come forward. And I find it really interesting when I presented my thesis and presented it to the palliative care team at the University of Wisconsin, where I was working. It just instantly became political. And that decision is really between the doctor, the patient, family, and friends. And there's really nothing political about it. You know what I mean? It's a personal choice. We cannot choose when we die. We cannot choose when we are born. So why not help it along so we can be surrounded by family and friends and know that we won't be there alone when we die? The choice is yours.
It's my own. Now it's my own. It's only by grace alone that I walk in the light.
Hi, this is Joan Halsell. She's a nurse and a funeral director that I work with at a local hospital. And we're going to talk about the MAID law and what is death.
Death, very, very simply, is a life-altering change, not just for the patient, but for the family and friends too. It's an end, and from that end comes new beginnings that we don't necessarily focus on right at first, but we know that death being ending, beauty can come from the ashes. It's just hard to see it at that moment.
I agree. You've done an excellent presentation on what happens to us physically when we die.
Correct.
Can you explain that a little bit?
From a nurse's perspective, when we are facing a patient who is dying, we kind of go into our own little fight or flight mode, and we become hyper vigilant, and because we are usually in the mode to save. What we need to do is take a step back, take a deep breath, and realize that we can be a part of a process that can be beautiful, bringing comfort to the patient, those around the patient, as well as ourselves. So we know that our heart rates will increase. We become a little more, like I said, hypervigilant, and we just need to take a breath.
That's really important. And what I learned from our previous chaplain and dealing with patients who have died is that we become the storyteller.
That is absolutely correct. Mm-hmm. Absolutely correct. We spend a lot of time talking, and I think that there is a greater opportunity for us to listen, not just as nurses, but as those around a patient or a person who is dying. They want to tell their story, and if we listen with our hearts and with our ears wide open, they have a lot to tell us. And I bet a lot of it is comforting, more comforting than fearful.
That's really important because a lot of people are fearful of death.
Very much, because it's unknown. We don't talk about it. It changes everything. I use the example of the person who is dying or who has died. They're a brother, they're a sister, they're a wife, a husband, a daughter, a child, a parent, a grandparent. They're a provider. Maybe the family is losing their sole income. Whatever that person is to every person within their circles, it's life-altering. And so we don't know exactly how much of an impact it will be, but we know that it is forever changing. And it's not right for us to say, I know what you're going through, because we don't. Every situation is different. Every relationship is different. And every person within their circles has their own modicum of providability, whether it be financial, emotional, physical. It's a huge loss. So we don't know. But we can try to understand, and we can try to assimilate. But what we can do the most is just be that loving source of saying, I want to understand, and I'll be the ear to listen.
And I think that's what's important about the MAID law, because it gives that person who's near the end of their life, they have 48 hours left to live, or they have 6-month terminal illness, and they can go to a doctor that can prescribe a prescription and give them a medication that will end their life. And they have to be of sound mind. So I think one of the specificities of the MAID law I really like is that that person who makes that choice can pick the time and the place and the people who are going to be there for him or her when they do die.
Yeah. I think the MAID law is new in our region. I've seen some aspects of it throughout our country and globally. I think one of the best things that it can provide is further education and opportunity. Whether you're for or against it, it's truly not your decision until you're that patient. And I've never been in that situation, and I won't be in that situation until that time comes. But I think it's an option. And one of the things that we hear as nurses or as funeral directors is we don't have a lot of control. And this could be an opportunity for one more piece of control to be able to be given or granted. Whether it's followed through, used or not, it's an opportunity. And I think that has to be respected.
Right, and if you don't use the medication given to you, that's okay, you just need to return it because it's a lethal dose of morphine.
Someone will have to return it. You
Right.
won't be able to,
Right.
Someone will have to return it.
Somebody
Correct.
will have to return it.
Right.
And I think of the patient, one of my patients that passed, I remember he was just made a DNR that morning. His wife was in the room. And I asked the doc, can we get him off the telemetry? Can we get him off the oxygen? He's constantly alarming.
Right.
And his body temperature wasn't coming above 93, 94.
Correct.
And that's one of the signs.
Right.
And as a nurse, it's the first time I've consistently seen it, but it made me realize it's going to happen soon. Okay. So when I did all that, the patient just fell asleep. Mm-hmm. And when I came back, like 10 minutes later, because his wife was in the room, he looked so calm and so peaceful. I had not realized that he had passed, and his wife did not realize it. So I went to just check his pulse, and it wasn't there. Right. And his wife's in the room, and she doesn't realize it yet. And I knew at that moment, how am I going to handle this? Because I found out that he died right before she did, and she was in the same room with him. Mm-hmm. But it was because of my nursing skills. So I stepped out of the room, got another nurse, and explained to her kind of what was happening. I wanted her to be the person, because she didn't know her at all,
right,
to tell her that her husband just passed. So I could remain neutral and be the storyteller. Right. And of course, when she found out, she was very upset.
Of course.
But I chose to remain calm. And that really showed me the power of death. Mm-hmm.
It's a sacred moment to be there at such a sacred time. We can all celebrate births. We've been there when a child is born, or when we have a friend or family member with the anticipation of a 40-week pregnancy, and here comes this bundle of joy. And I like to share my story of the sacred moments of being at my mother's bedside when she drew her final breaths. It was about 9 o'clock that morning when she whispered her final words to me, which were, "I love you, baby girl." And baby girl was her favorite term for me because I was born premature, so I was a little one. Little One and Baby Girl were her monikers for me. And shortly after that, her eyes became that coma gray. And as a nurse, you know exactly what that coma gray eye is like. There's a vacancy there. And as her body systems began to shut down and the coloring in her extremities became dark because the blood and the oxygen are not perfusing to those areas, and as her urine output became darker, and as every organ began to fail, you knew that the physical death was impending. And as she opened her eyes to take her final gasps or breaths of air, her eyes became this Caribbean blue. And as a Protestant Christian, it was in my heart, and with my dad and my mom, my sister at my side, we knew she was seeing heaven for the first time. And in that sacred moment, the fear of death pushed aside to, she's no longer in pain and she's no longer suffering. And that beautiful sacred moment is what I focus on. Was I was able to be there. And maybe that has allowed me to see death differently with others, especially as a nurse. But it gives me peace that most people run from the moment, where I can sit and see that sacredness to build from those ashes that I talk about. Is what a precious moment, and I didn't turn my back. I was able to be there. There is sadness, of course, because that's a loss of life, absolutely. And my mother was such a beautiful, fundamental part of who I am, whether it was as a funeral director or even now as a nurse. Her memory drives me, and her grace that she always showed others, that empowers me to be better in her memory. And if we see that, we should really do our best to incorporate that into furthering their legacy.
That's so important. I had a similar experience when my dad died. I wasn't there, and my brother had called me, and he goes, "If you want to see him alive, you got to come up now. Like, get on the plane and come." And I'm like, I was ready for that moment, and I knew I was going to choose not to, because I chose to see him alive.
Sure.
So the 2 to 3 years before that, he was 90. I went out of my way. I couldn't afford it. Sometimes I didn't have the money to make it back home.
Yeah.
And I needed to see him. I wanted to see him alive. And I'm so glad I did that, because when that choice came, I accepted the fact that he had passed.
Right.
But my memories of him were alive.
Right. COVID was such an interesting time when families weren't allowed to be in, or maybe their next of kin was just as sick as they were and couldn't be at bedside, and we were the ones there, and that took a toll on us. That took a huge toll on us, because we had to suppress and compartmentalize and push those aside because there was another patient waiting. And I think one thing that we have to recognize with grief is that we have to address it, whether we are a nurse, funeral director, spouse, child, whatever. If we don't address it healthily from the get-go, we're going to have to address it later, because our physical bodies are going to show what our emotional beings haven't been allowed to do. So I think it's important that we have these strong conversations about strong topics, so that when the time does come, we can approach them gently with the gloves on our, the white gloves on our hands, to approach them gently as possible. And I think that the MAID law is going to allow us to have those conversations and openness to others, because there are some that will talk about them, there are some that won't, but I think it's just going to make us approach it from another angle, and that is, this is your choice. It may not be mine, but this is your choice, and I want to listen, and I want to help, and I want to be what you need me to be in that moment. So, because I think it's scary for everyone, patient included.
Right, and I love how the MAID law gives that person control, where they can pick the time, the moment, the people, so that they can have that conversation. And if they do decide to choose that route, that is available to them, and that life goes on.
Life does go on. It has to, because the whole world can't come to a stop. The life has to go on, and we do that better when we talk about these topics for our future generations. If we talk about death as much as we talk about life, I think there would be an easier understanding, not to be feared. It's I think you and I both have seen death come gently in the night for some and come horrifically on a dinosaur's back with others. We just, we don't know what the opportunity, what it will present to each patient, but I would prefer a gentle passing, and if the MAID law can provide that, the medications can do that, I think that option should be given to others. No matter what the decision is, a gentle exit would be much kinder for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I remember another patient, where that happened, and in my own situation, I've decided to be cremated, and so I've had the conversations. I have 3 adult children, and divorced, so they're going to be the ones that are going to be responsible, and they're all men. And men are not responsible as if I had a daughter type situation. It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
So we've had that conversation.
Good.
And it's interesting with cremation, it's not a funeral.
Cremation and or funeral provide the opportunity for a life to be honored. Whether the final disposition be cremation, a person can be viewed, there can be a public viewing, and then cremation to follow, and that happens with some religious sects or cultures is they want the body embalmed present for others to see, or ceremonies or shrouding or whatever the cultural beliefs may be to take place before cremation takes place. Funeral, a person is in a casket and laid to rest in ground. The opportunities and the options are endless for both. Cremation has taken a huge leap in popularity over the last 20 years, where I remember in my hometown, one of my grandparents was one of the first to be cremated, and boy, that set the town abuzz. They had chosen cremation, where it's more predominant now. One of the beauties of cremation is it allows time for a proper memorial service to really engage creativity and allow for others to travel in at a much later date. My mother passed away on an Easter Sunday, and there had been travel plans. So maybe doing something closer to her birthday in August would have been a possibility. With cremation, you have that opportunity to delay and choose a more appropriate time, where with casketed burial, you tend to do things a little more sooner than waiting weeks.
Right. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for this opportunity.
You're welcome.
Death is going to happen to all of us. So all you baby boomers out there, because I'm 64, going on 65, and this is moving a little closer, we're all gonna die. Yeah, we're all gonna die. So let's pretend we're not going to die, okay? We're all gonna die. And wanting to have some control near the end of our life, I think, is very natural response, if we especially have had a wonderful and long life.
Are you going to answer that? That was your doctor. It's the 3rd time he's called.
You noticed?
Yeah, I noticed. Like, what's going on? I know you haven't been feeling well.
I am dying.
What?
I am dying from cancer.
What kind of cancer?
It's really aggressive pancreatic cancer. I don't want surgery, radiation, or chemo. The risks are too high.
How much time do we have?
Well, that's another issue.
What do you mean?
I want to choose when I die.
What does that mean?
Have you heard of the new MAID law in New Mexico?
No, what is it?
Medical aid in dying. It allows my doctor to assist a mentally capable but terminally ill patients access a life-ending prescription. I can administer the medication myself, but I do have to return it if I don't use it within 48 hours.
When were you planning on doing this?
The doctor hasn't given me much time. It's very aggressive. A couple of weeks.
All right, I get it, but why do you feel like you need to die, like, so fast?
I haven't chosen death. Death has chosen me. I want to be reborn.
Do you believe in reincarnation?
You know I do. I might come back and land as a butterfly on your forehead just to say hello.
You're crazy, you know that? I'm not ready. I need more time. I gotta tell you something. You've touched my soul. I was really depressed when I met you, and I haven't told anyone this, but I was really thinking about killing myself. In a weird way, I've had a little brush with death too. But I met you and you saved me, so I told Death to go take a hike. I need more time. I need you. I'm not ready for you to go.
You saved me from a life of addiction too. In some ways, you've been like the father I never had. I am so grateful to you for being my friend, my lover, my soulmate.
It has been an honor to be your friend and your lover and your soulmate. I need more time. Can you choose not to do this right now?
I can wait until we're both ready.
Thank you.
You're welcome, my love.
And all I need is 30 minutes, 5 days a week is better than 40 hours of losing your soul. Then why don't you show me? 'Cause I wanna know. And why don't you hold me? Feels like it's ready to blow. And I wanna know. And I'll be waiting for you as
How you guys doing? I am interviewing my son, Jeffrey James, who's a singer-songwriter. And he has allowed me to use 2 of his songs in my documentary that he's going to talk about.
Yeah, so the first song is called Tower Hill, and like a lot of my songs, it has many meanings. But one of the meanings is preparing to welcome someone over to the other side when they die. I had my grandparents in mind when I wrote it, but it's this idea that after death there's a happy meeting place, or I think it's what I want life to be like after death, right? It's this beautiful place where we reunite with people that we lost in life, and including our animals and loved ones, and it's kind of the vision for me of reuniting in the afterlife with people I love. And it's called Tower Hill.
Cool. And you wrote that in Brazil?
Shot a music video in Brazil. Wrote it in the heart of the pandemic, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so it's just about my struggles at that time, and also preparing for the death of people as they age and grow older.
What I like to talk about too is us having this dad-son conversation about what do we want when we die. And what I wanted to tell you is I've already planned my cremation, and it's paid for. And then supposedly you're not allowed to have a funeral, that they can send the ashes right to your doorstep. And then I would like to have a celebration about my life with as many siblings and friends that can be there, that you guys could organize. And I'm assuming it would be in Madison, Wisconsin.
Okay.
And if not, wherever more people can be. And then take it from there. And then I want my ashes. I tried to get a crypt before the pandemic, and I found it for like $1,000 if you go through the city of Madison, Wisconsin, where I want to be buried, because I spent the majority of my life in Madison, Wisconsin. And I would like that to be there so the grandchildren or my siblings can come and visit it whenever they want. And then the other issue that I want is I'm having little urns made so you each can have the ashes. And then I want a 4th urn or a 5th urn. To my favorite bike trail route is in Manitowoc and Two Rivers, right along the lake where my brother lives.
Oh,
and
cool.
I've already talked to him, and I told him I want my ashes spread somewhere along there. It's beautiful gardens and sculptures, and it's Lake Michigan. I have a very strong, powerful connection to the Great Lakes and to the ocean, but more to the Great Lakes. So something I haven't figured out. I believe in reincarnation, so I'm hoping that helps me somewhere down the road.
Yeah. Well, you all grew up around Great Lakes.
Right.
Oh, you're born in Ohio?
Yes.
Were you close to a Great
Yes.
Lake there?
Yes.
Really?
Mhm.
Okay.
Lake Erie.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you live by Lake Erie, Lake Michigan.
Yeah, then Manitowoc, I think that's still Lake Michigan.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I lived in a lot of different places growing up, and water is a very soothing, comforting element for me that I feel comfortable in the afterlife with. So.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our discussion about death kind of goes back 20 years to when I first started playing guitar, and you were in a death and dying class, I believe, in
palliative
master's
care
school.
class.
Palliative care class in master's school at UW-Madison. And I came in and played Grave Digger by Dave Matthews. And,
Yeah.
and then fast forward, probably 10 years, give or take, and yeah, about 10 years actually, I was in a death and dying psychology class at Sierra College in Truckee, California. And that was a profound, life-changing experience for me. And, you know, we wrote out our wills. I don't live in California anymore, and I don't know what ever happened to that. I think it was like the 5-wish law. You could really write out this little packet we all printed out, and that was your will. Even at a young age, we did that. And so that was really profound for me. I think a lot of people don't think about death. It's so taboo in our culture, so I really respect that you're doing this documentary on physician-assisted suicide.
Right, it's on the MAID law, and one of the reasons I decided to do this, because that class from 20 years ago, there was only 2 states, Oregon and the state of Washington, that had a similar law, and since then there's 20 more states, or it might even be 11, I can't think. So, but the last state is New Mexico, and I live in the state of New Mexico now.
Yeah.
And when this happened, it was so anticlimactic, because a lot of people didn't realize how powerful this is, that this law passed with the support of the community, the governor, the legislation. It will never happen in Wisconsin, because that's what I learned when I took this class 20 years ago. It was my major thesis on how to develop a similar law to happen in the state of Wisconsin. And it won't happen because it's too conservative, it's too political. It like suddenly becomes a political issue instead of a personal decision between a patient and a doctor.
Well, it's really interesting. I was going to ask that. Is there a correlation between these being liberal states or states that traditionally aren't based in religious traditional ideologies?
I would say it's leaning more towards liberal states. We have a Democratic governor, and this law was created after a judge who wanted it created. She was dying from breast cancer, and then when she died, her family took on the initiative to make her wish come true, and they did by creating the MAID law in New Mexico. And so that's why I think it's really important to talk about it, to talk about death, and to have this option, because that's my bigger goal for this documentary is, number one, what is the MAID law? It's an option out there when you're near the end of your life in the state of New Mexico, that you have the choice to end your life if you only have a couple days to live. You have 48 hours, and then you need to be able to give the medicine to yourself. So it's an option that I would consider if I had end-stage cancer and I was in miserable pain. And I wanted my family and friends to be there. I can choose the day and time. We don't choose the day and time that we're born, and this gives us an option to choose the day and time when we die. So.
Well, it's fascinating. When I had this idea for a song called 100 Trees, and I don't know how sure I am about this, but I like the idea of being buried under 100 different fruit trees around the world. You know, under my favorite fruit, like star fruit tree, avocado tree in Hawaii, and fruit trees in Europe, and of course in my home state of Wisconsin, in Madison. And I just love this idea of bearing fruit, you know, that and then when those seeds fall off the trees, they're eaten by birds and then spread further, and you just live on forever. I think it's this really cool idea I have. I saw somewhere on social media there was a person who was terminally ill, and their last wish was they didn't get their last wish to travel all over the world, so they literally sent their ashes around the world, and like tribes, and I don't know where these tribes are, you know, South America, I believe Africa, all over the world, Asia, they buried them. Like they read their story and they honored them and they recorded it, and this person, you know, not in the flesh, but in spirit, traveled all over the world. And so I just love that idea. I think death is really philosophical, and I think religious-based ideas are very different from the philosophy's approach to death. And I think it's been said that people die how they live, and that's really fascinating to me. What does to actually not be afraid of death mean? I think it's so easy to say, but how true is it? And what would you do if you were in that situation where your suffering was insurmountable and you had the choice to leave? And I think that's really profound, especially to note that you weren't given the choice before. But it seems like the law's evolved from a physician doing it to you administering the drugs, and learning from mistakes of the past, if I could call them that, to have it be a better law, and hopefully better as we learn. But yeah, for me, I don't know what I would do. I think it's a really difficult situation, but I do love the idea of the afterlife. And I recently read a quote by Rumi, the famous poet, who said, "Death is our wedding with eternity." And so I thought that was really beautiful.
All I need is 30 minutes. 5 days a week is better than 40 hours of losing your soul. And why don't you show me? 'Cause I wanna know. And why don't you hold me? Feels like it's ready to blow. And I wanna know. I'll be waiting for you, standing there with open arms, open arms. And I'd feel foolish if I walked away. If I were to stay, why don't you show me? 'Cause I wanna know. And why don't you hold me? Feels like it's ready to blow. And I wanna know. And I'll be waiting for you as you I'll be waiting for you, standing there with open arms, open arms. The fire is burning, the whole forest down, the flowers are blooming. Up from the ground, you were all alone there. With the sun going down, and you were all alone there. And there's light all around, and the sun's going down. And I'll be I'll be waiting for you, standing there with open arms, open arms. Easy upon yourself, be kind above all else. Don't you fear, know what lies ahead. Look for those good words inside your head. Oh, hey, yeah. Oh, and be easy upon yourself and be kind above all else. And don't you fear no what lies ahead. Look for those good words inside your head.
The purpose of this documentary and to talk about death is to really start having these conversations with your family and friends, with your loved ones, where you want to be buried, where you want to die, and what choices you will make, and who will help you make those choices if you're not able to make them anymore. Then you can talk to your family and friends if you want to be cremated, buried. I remember when I took my palliative care course 20 years ago with a major researcher from Wisconsin. Really, the choices are up to you on how elaborate and expensive you want your funeral or how simple you want it to be. And what's nice about the MAID law is now we can choose the day we die to be surrounded by our family and friends so that when it does happen, those decisions can move forward without you because you have that discussion. So I hope you enjoyed this documentary as much as I had fun doing it, and that it will help you make a choice on what's right for you.
That I walk in the light. Yeah, yeah. Sister Anna welcomed me into her home. Celebration with the family and children. Oh, opened up my soul. Brother Philip smashed the frameworks of fear under the great banyan tree. There's so many souls set free. It's only by grace alone that I walk in the light. I woke to hope giggling outside my tent, with the mother through the bamboo forest to the waterfall of grace, to where I did repent. And I tore off my clothes and I climbed close. I spread my arms wide as the wind